Welcome, welcome. Dr. Stephen Hobbs here from the International Mentoring Community, sharing a video from the community conversation on mentoring that took place on June the 10th, 2020. And according to the picture you see before you, the topic was, if mentoring matters, what are its measures of success? Now, what we did was we took a look at the word success. Then we unpacked the importance of measuring success. And then what we did is we had a conversation, dug around into what might be the measures that you would use to determine success. So with that, enjoy the video, enjoy the conversation, and of course, please add your comments to the section around the video where you can comment, because we would enjoy learning from you as well. Welcome, welcome everyone. Dr. Stephen Hobbs here from the International Mentoring Community. And we have Doug Lawrence with us today, and I'll have him and our other listener introduce themselves. So with that, I'm just going to ask Doug and Buck, who are here, just to briefly introduce themselves and what's their connection with mentoring. And I will leave that in this community conversation, just so you know who's here. And then I'll introduce the first topic, and we'll get into it, and we'll enjoy ourselves for the next hour or so. So with that, Doug, you want to just share who you are?
Sure. So good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Lawrence, and I'm the co-founder of the International Mentoring Community. And I also have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Education, at least for this particular time frame, with the International Mentoring Community. And I have my own practice of mentoring, where I work with people and organizations from the aspect of all things mentoring.
Great, wonderful. Buck, you want to just introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, good afternoon from where I'm at, Jacksonville, Florida. Buck McTee. I would call myself a mentor in training, and I'm a mentee of Doug's, which I'm very proud to admit. I think this is a lifelong journey. Super excited to be here. And if it's all right with you all, I'm going to pretty much be a fly on the wall for the rest of the meeting.
Wonderful. But certainly encourage you to jump in if you've got some thoughts on the topic. We always appreciate the interaction. So welcome aboard, Buck.
Thank you.
So just a little bit more about myself. I am the Director of Certification for IMC. So I'm the one in the background making sure that the certification process works, that the auditors are in place, the verifiers are in place, make sure that the profiles are up to date. So I have a lot more of the admin kind of work, but I also have a practice through my company called Wealth Movement, WELLTH. And what I'm doing is I'm linking mentoring with the well-living workplace. So you might, in short, say mentoring in the workplace. So I'm helping to establish that baseline for organizations around the world. So with that introduction, let's get going, Doug, and let's see what happens. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. So the very first topic that we were looking at today was in a pic that you will see now, and it says, if mentoring matters, what are its measures of success? And this one popped up through a question that was sent to me, and I thought it would make for a great question for our community conversation. And true to form, what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest the following. Let's take a look at what we mean by the word success measure, and then take a look at where measures of success are important to mentoring and make that connection. And then let's unpack what would be some measures of success if we see it of value to mentoring. And if mentoring matters, is measures of success something that we want to include in it? So we're going to let this unfold. Let's see what happens. This could be a 10-minute conversation, or it could be a 40-minute conversation. Let's see what happens. And again, I would just remind everyone, there is a possibility that people will just drop in and say hello and maybe stay for 5-10 minutes, and then they may leave. We never know what's going to happen. But with that, let's just sort of take a look at what we think the word success means.
Difficult to separate what kind of the just dealing with the word success and not wanting to tie it into mentoring. That's just who I am, I guess. But
Yeah.
so when I think of the word success, I think that that's something that each one of us has to define. There's really no textbook definition. There probably is a textbook definition, but I don't think that we can take and apply that to each of our different situations. Like success for me would be the launching of an independent body for certification for mentoring. That's something I've been working on for a number of years, and once that's achieved, then that's how I would define something that was successful in my life.
Yeah, I go along with that because there's this sense of an outcome. If I get this outcome, then I have some sense of success. Now, the interesting thing is the outcome might suggest it's the end point, but there is the outcomes along the process to be able to get to that end product or the end program or whatever it is. But I'll join you with this one, Doug, is I've talked about and shared insights about success for years, and I'm not going to sit here and say I've got the definitive answer to what is success, because it varies by person to person. But it does establish some sense of a place where you do some kind of formative review or summative assessment. There's some kind of, okay, we've reached somewhere, or we're moving along, and we've got some milestones that we can take a look at and say that we're there. I might use other words like achievement or accomplishment as other secondary words that go with that. So I think we're both probably in agreement that it's a word that you've got to come back to yourself, look at your own head, heart, and hands, and say, this is what I think it's about. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I like the idea of the concept of the milestones, because along the journey that I've been on, there definitely have been milestones that I could go, oh, gee, check mark. I should celebrate that bit of success. But that still doesn't preclude me from continuing on to maybe look for what is the greater success.
Right. And I think what we do is we take a look at the question, what's the measures of success, and linking it to mentoring. It might be just worth taking a look at success, mentoring, and just having a bit of a conversation about that and where success might show up in a mentoring arrangement, and then come back and take a look at how we might measure that. Okay, so what we're looking at this point is, what do we associate success and mentoring if we were to bring that together? And I'll jump in and get started here, okay? When I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, there is the sense of what the mentee would consider to be success, what the mentor would consider to be success, what the organization who may be starting up a mentoring in the workplace would determine success. How might the community, because of these mentoring programs, see the success of this notion of mentorship if it's in play, and doing it from that. So there's a lot of different views or perspectives of success. I'm just going to take a look at mentor-mentee at the moment, and then if we want to unpack the other ones, we can. I think that this notion of success is really and it comes back to what we just shared. It's a head, heart, and head, heart, and hands. There we go. Head, heart, and hands interpretation of what is happening and what happened when the mentor and mentee are together. And each would have a view, and then they would have a shared view to be able to take a look at that, what unfolded. Now, I'm thinking that most mentors and mentees may not use the word success. They might say, we accomplished our contract, we got our agreement taken care of, this has been a wonderful experience. They're not going, well, we just had a successful conversation. And I think, I'm not sure that they would use it. That's why this was an interesting question when it was brought to me, is the use of that word and how it might fit into it. Now, I think what it does is it brings out, okay, if there is a success or we met our achievement or accomplishments, there are things we need to measure. I get that, and that's where we'll go to afterwards. Any thoughts to what I've just shared there?
Well, I think it comes back to what we talked about a bit earlier, which was the definition of success. But more importantly, I think it's that, so for each match that you have, each mentor and mentee that are working together, their perspective on what constitutes success is going to definitely be different than the match for Bob and Jack, for example. So it's going to be definitely different, because when I think back to all the people that I've spent time with, there's been short-term success, there's been long-term success, and it's a matter of what does that, when we sit down and say, for example, I meet with a mentee and we're defining the expectations for the relationship. One of the questions that could very well be asked is, at the end of the day, how would you as the mentee define our time together as being successful? What is it going to take for us to be able to check the boxes, so to speak, to say, we did this, and this was successful.
So I think then that both the mentor and mentee with that example would have to have had a conversation about what does success mean, and is it a term that we're going to use in our mentoring arrangement, mentoring relationship? Because they may have other words like achievement, accomplishment, whatever it might be. I think there's an underlying point there. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would, and I guess we can also come at the whole concept of success from a growth perspective as well. So part of our definition talks about personal and professional growth in a mentoring arrangement or a mentoring relationship, and so that could also be labeled, if you want to use that term, labeled as a means of success or as success as well.
Well, I know when I was preparing for this, and again, I always have the advantage because I put up the questions to get things going, is I don't actually remember in my mentoring arrangements, relationships, ever using the word success in our conversations. There was always other words with it. So I went back to the person who sent this to me, and I said, what is it that you're trying to get at with the question, right? And they said, well, it's just a word that I use because I'm trying to figure out, did we succeed or not? Is it worth continuing? And all that other kind of evaluative language that's being used. And she used the word success. And I said, well, I'm going to pop it on and see what happens, okay, in our conversation.
Right.
And that's where it came from. But I don't ever remember using that term myself. And even when it came to mentoring in the workplace programs, I very rarely talked about it as a success. I would say, okay, well, I completed the mentoring conversation. We met the targets that we both agreed to, and what the program is about. So we got where we needed to get to. I tend to use words like accomplishment and achievement. So it was never success. And I racked my brain because I'm going back 30 some years. Did I ever really use that term? And the answer was no.
I think one of the other words that we can, and I know I use it fairly often, is value.
Okay.
So it's the idea of what was the value that we got from our conversation today, and what are some of the things we need to do differently next time, so that we both feel that we got the value that we were looking for. And I think when you look at it from a value and using the word success, I think they're interchangeable. That they could be construed to say much the same.
Well, what that brings up for me is there's a word value to it, and there is a number value to it. And whenever I'm just sharing out at the moment. I'm not sure if this is completely correct because this is a conversation. Let's see where it goes. Success sort of brings numbers to mind. Value brings words to mind.
Mm-hmm.
That just struck me, and I went, well, okay, this is kind of interesting. So if we keep measuring mentoring using words and anecdotes and stories and that, or are we trying to get to, well, we met 6 times, which are the measure, kind of 6 times, and we each drank 2 coffees, and right, and the numbers side of that. Help me out here. Any thoughts? Yes? No?
Yeah, I can see that. Because initially, when you first started to go down that path, I immediately went to the workplace mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
where it is definitely it's not words don't define success, numbers do. So, and then when I look at setting aside the workplace mentoring stuff, is there a way, is it a combination of numbers and words then that we use to define success of a mentoring arrangement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Well,
I think it could be.
mm-hmm. Well, again, that's the great thing about these community conversations. We get to explore, discover. I don't think we're here to prescribe that this is the answer as much as to unfold and to see where things go. But I'm going to ask Buck if you want to jump in here. And one of the ways I know that you want to jump in is I'll see that you unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll just keep going. So with that, the elements here then is, let's move into, I think we would both agree, is there are some measures that are in play to help us know that we've moved forward. That we didn't move backwards, that we moved forwards in our conversations, our mentoring arrangement, mentoring relationship. So what might be some of those measures that we can say that we've moved forward? Do you have any that you off the top of your head right now?
The measure of success would be, from a personal perspective, would be the behavior shift from having little to no self-esteem to now all of a sudden having a very high level of self-esteem. So watching and seeing that transition take place was a means or a way for me to determine, yes, I'm heading on the right path.
Okay. So I see, Buck, you have unfolded your mic. Did you want to share something?
You did call me out a little bit. I was listening, and I was thinking of just between the business aspect and the personal aspect of mentoring and the mentee-mentor relationship. It seems to be very transactional, and I like that we're talking about the part where you're not necessarily going to see the effects immediately as far as a bottom line with your business. And so on that very interpersonal level with a mentee and a mentor, you will see that the conversations change and that they evolve over time. Like Doug was saying about people or someone that he mentioned that gained confidence, or maybe their paradigm shifted to where they, and I'll use myself as an example, that I think 6 months ago that I would be on a phone call with you guys right now. I didn't really think of that at the time, but now here we are. So it's that evolution, and it's transactional. The transactions that I've had with Doug have sparked more and more interest in the mentoring community in me, so that I want to delve into this deeper and deeper. So that's my 2 cents for now.
All right. So we're talking about measures. And so Doug, you had mentioned this notion of there's a behavior perspective. There's a shift, in a sense, of characteristics, or like confidence was
Yes.
one way, right? Then Buck suggested something about there's a conversational evolution. And again, I would think that there's a perspective shift about involvement. He used the word evolution, all right? And I thought that those were two great ideas at this point. Did you have another measure that we might be looking at? Ross, I can share one.
Yeah, go while I got a mull here for a minute.
That's sure. Well, there are the typical measures, and let's get those out on the table. All right, you're supposed to meet for 6 hours. You met for your 6 hours. Okay, all right. Did we actually get anywhere? Well, that's another interpretation, but we did, from a measure point of view, we did have our 6 hours. Okay, or we did meet every Friday, and there wasn't any excuses why you didn't show up, okay, because there was a full commitment. So you could look at it in that sense and report it. I'm talking more about mentoring in the workplace kind of programs, okay? So let's call that's an important measure, all right, in some regards. I think one of the measures for me is, and I'm going to go a little bit into what Buck shared, is this notion of the evolution of the conversation. Because when I, as the mentor, start to feel as though I am now a mentee, because I'm learning something, whether it's the questions that are being asked, the stimulation of the conversation, then, and I use this term a lot, head, heart, and hands, I feel as though there's something happening for me. That is glorious. I love that feeling. But how do you pop it up on a website and say, well, I just felt this? Because it's a hard way to offer that measure, but it is something in myself that tickles me and gets me up and gets me going. It is a measure of success. It is a measure of evolution. It is a measure of value, whatever it might be, but it's sometimes difficult to go posting it, right? Okay, maybe you could turn it into a testimonial, right? You could talk about it from that perspective. So testimonials are a way in which to bring the story out.
But I think that, I hear what you're saying, but I think where the success comes from is from the growth of that relationship. So at the end of the day, setting aside sort of the more, I don't know what's the best word, but it would be coming back, I guess, to the numbers. I to be honest, I look at success more so from the personal aspect of it, is what did we both gain from this? So, and I go into a mentoring relationship, excuse me, with with the objective that I too am going to learn and grow, but sometimes I too am going to learn and grow perhaps more than the person I'm working with in that. So my mentee, and I'm going to take away from that relationship some different things, and it could be stuff that deals with me personally. It could be with my mentoring practice, my approach to mentoring. It could be a number of different things. But I think that it's, and that's something that, you know, you would take that step back and kind of take a look and say, I personally got value from the time I spent with, you know, whoever it is that you're working with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that leads to hearing maybe later that the mentee stepped into being a mentor and stepped into it in such a way is that they could share the stories of their own mentoring arrangement, mentoring relationship that they had with me if I was the mentor, and then to be able to have that conversation with them. Oh, well, I stepped into it, and I was doing it, and then you can use that to strengthen your own mentor arrangement, mentor relationship that you have at the moment, and it's sort of, that's what I call the ripple effect. That's where community benefits and out it goes from there. So there's an element of that truth that unfolds as well. Any others that you can think of at this point in time?
Well, the one that sort of just jumped to my mind right now is the idea of referrals. So when you get a referral from, so you've worked with somebody who then passes your name on to somebody else who calls you to work with them. I see that as, you know, from our topic of success, I see that that's something that I could say, okay, I'm obviously doing the right things, or I'm meeting the needs of a certain group. Even like yesterday, I did a webinar for a professional group here in Saskatchewan, and at the end of it, you know, the feedback that I got was very positive. So I viewed what we talked about over the course of the hour, that was successful as well.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, 2 people responded through LinkedIn. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read their responses, and I'm not going to edit it. I'm just going to read it and see if it stimulates anything in us that any of us wants to respond to. So this is a person out of Toronto, and they say that they're a mentee in a program. It may not give you immediate success, but the best way which can determine the success is that at least a mentee will be able to learn something from the mentor. In addition to this, if you have built a strong connection and you are in touch with him or her, even after finishing this mentorship program, then this would be another KPI, key performance indicator, that can determine the success of the program. So this notion, I think, a key word would be that the mentee learned something, okay?
Yeah.
And that they finished the program according to the agreement that was set, because sometimes you can close a mentoring arrangement because either the mentor has lost it in terms of their involvement, or the mentee has lost it in terms of their involvement. So there are those ways of dealing with it. So I can see that. I think we're lining up with what this person has shared.
And I just recalled my thought now was the idea of the relationship or the arrangement continuing on past the end point for the formal end point. And I think I look to that as well as a means to be able to say, obviously bringing value. So, you know, all of those words that we would use to wrap into the success package to be able to say that it went well. So, you know, when I look at a number of relationships, arrangements that I have, a lot of them are ones that have continued on over a period of time, some of which that have continued on past the end date of a formal mentoring program.
Okay. Well, then let me read the next one. And this is someone who has certification as a business architect, and that's in their explanation of who they are. And then they wrote, always thought that my goal as a mentor was to enable the mentee to stand on his or her own 2 feet with confidence. When that occurs, it's time to talk about taking a break, even if only temporary, in the mentoring relationship, to let that person shine and learn. That's kind of an interesting take. If I'm reading into that, is I'm in my mentoring arrangement. One of the measures is it's time to take a little bit of break. In other words, I think is to go get more experience on your own and then bring some of that experience back to our conversation. But to purposefully take a break, I think that's what I'm reading into this one. I just thought it was an interesting twist on where we're going, and I had never thought of it from that perspective.
So here's what jumps to the forefront for me, that the response was very corporate focused. And so while we may have been successful in addressing the professional growth of the mentee, to take that break and not be there to provide that guidance and that support. And I don't mean from a telling perspective, but just to be cognizant of what's taking place and knowing the right questions to ask to get us back on track. But what's missing, and this is what I find in a lot of corporate mentorship programs, is there's no thought about the personal side, the personal growth of the mentee. So are they dealing with, so yes, you may have addressed the professional side, but what about, are they experiencing anxiety? Are they experiencing stress? And if that gets in its way, that's going to act as an obstacle or barrier for the growth that you think you've achieved on the professional side. That's going to be that obstacle or barrier, and it's going to either slow down or stop any development of their professional growth.
One of the thoughts that I had when you were reading the last comment was about, something finite, like taking a break, or, I guess too many times in a corporate setting, people, they find a check mark. They're like, okay, we check mark a box, and they're like, okay, like you mentioned earlier, we've done our 6 hours, so we're good now, right? Okay, get back to work, or what, whatever the conversation is. And I think that it puts a rush, and it puts a lot of pressure on the relationship or on the mentoring program overall. And I would say that it might take away from the value, because the person that is the mentee is saying, oh, well, we're at, maybe they're saying, well, we're at 5.5 hours, and I don't think I've figured this out, but we have a half hour left, and I'm done, and they're going to kick me out of this program. And so then what do you have? You have a person that might just hold back and shut down. That was my thought when you were reading that section.
Great. And it's wonderful you mentioned about the checklist checkbox, because Doug and I, you could probably see our heads nodding and smiling, right? Because it's how a lot of people approach mentoring. And when you do that, that's when it doesn't feel like mentoring anymore. It feels more like you moved over into something else. And so thank you for using that phrasing. All right. I appreciate that, Buck. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So a couple of things struck me as you were talking, and one of the reasons I was interested in this formal process is I, as a mentor, or less frequently a mentee, I'm often struck by how little there is in the way of KPIs. So I'm really a big fan of having something to measure. And I do think there's two different ways to look at it. I think you can look at it organizationally. So are the people who have been in the mentorship program and were mentees, can we measure job satisfaction? Can we measure promotion? Can we measure the quality of their job reviews? So are there any external measures that the people who have gone through this program feel benefit themselves and that the organization can measure? From the personal perspective, most of them strike me, the ones to me that would be at the forefront seem very subjective in nature, which I think is okay, but also challenging. So to me, is there a goal setting process at the beginning? You know, at the end of this, I would like to be able to, and I'm making this up, give a presentation without, you know, sweating through my clothes, or be up for 2 promotions, or get a promotion, or throw my hat in the ring for something I was afraid to do. I like the idea of there being very tangible benefits that the mentee identifies they want to achieve, and then during the course of the relationship, what the mentor can suggest might also be tangible. I do think you have to do the subjective ones about confidence and feel better, but I'm very much in my work as a strategy consultant connected to outcomes. So to the extent that you can connect it to specific behavior that is measurable, I think that's really important, and one of the gaps I've seen in a lot of mentor programs.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I hear where you're going, Rachel, and I think it's really important, and that's why at the very beginning, one has to define what success is, define what measures means, define what the measure criteria are going to be, define how you're going to do it. These are all things that are required to unfold at the very beginning, just so that you have a, I use the word path map, you have the goal setting, whatever it might be. I so hear you in what's happening, but to Buck's point as well, is to be alert that it doesn't sort of fall into becoming a checklist and lose the true sense, what I call the essence of mentoring, right? So that's something I would just share back to you at this point in time. I don't know if that brings any more for you, Rachel, or Buck or Doug to add in. Again, it's a community conversation.
I think what you're saying is so important, that it not just become a checklist. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some happy medium between accountability and process. Yes. When I first heard about this program and having gone through it and do a lot of what I call informal mentoring, it's very difficult to determine what the end is. So I think there's a balance where there has to be some sort of checklist, but that doesn't mean that there isn't also a personal connection focused on growth. I still struggle and would love guidance on, when do you know it's over? You know, I heard both of the participants say something from the perspective of the mentee, but from the mentor, you know, obviously there are formal programs, there's 6 weeks, you meet, you know, once a week, whatever it is, all the different models that people have. But is there a way at some point to say, we're done, we've accomplished what I think you need to accomplish, and moving forward, a different mentor would be better, or, you know, we're doing great, let's continue, and here are the new objectives that we're going to set.
Mm-hmm.
So I think where that all falls into is the what I refer to as the 3 phases of a mentoring relationship. So the first one is to build the trusted relationship. The second one is then I call it learning and development, which is where all the heavy lifting in the relationship takes place. But to speak to what you're talking about, Rachel, I think the third phase, which is the maintenance phase, where we're not as actively engaged in meeting on a regular basis and stuff, it'd be just a simple touch point to be able to say, how are things going? And you could set that up so you maybe start off. I do it with some of my folks where I touch base once a month just to see how they're doing. And then we mutually agree to start to push that out a little bit further and a little bit further. But that never prevents or precludes us from circling back to the second phase, which is learning and development, because there are some issues, challenges, opportunities, and that we maybe need to work on as part of the journey that we're on together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we're aiming towards the top of the hour here, and one of the things that I think would be great is if each person was to just share a key learning, or which could be in a sense a summary point, all right, around this this notion of if mentoring matters, what's the measures of success? How do you know you've achieved the mentoring? You've accomplished it, whatever words we might like to use here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shout out your name.
I do feel that I mean, there's striking a balance between the structural process and having, you know, the check marks, and a balance between just knowing when it's time to move on is very important. And I think that it's one of those where the to me, the mentee kind of has the indication of how, you know, how they feel moving forward. Not to put all the pressure on them, but again, to gain confidence and to be able to see that they can now take the things that they've learned through the relationship they had with their mentor and pass those on to the next person. I think to me, that's, you know, without any metrics or any checklist, that's a way to say that this is, you know, that it's time to spread their wings and fly, so to speak. So that to me would be the measurement.
Doug, do you want to share a summary point?
The one thing that I just wanted to touch on was the aspect of, so I had this call yesterday, I think it was, with a chap in Dublin, Ireland, who we were having a conversation about mentoring, and long story short, he shared with me an experience that he had where a mentorship program, that workplace mentoring program that he had helped implement, only lasted about a year, and then it sort of fizzled and crashed and burnt. And I asked him the one question, which ties back to what we're talking about from a success factor. What was the business issue that you tried to resolve by implementing mentoring? And he couldn't answer the question. So I think, you know, as we're looking at it from how do I go about measuring success in that? When I look at it certainly from the corporate mentorship side, it's being able to define what is the business issue or business problem I'm trying to solve by, excuse me, implementing mentoring. And whether that's, you know, a retention, whether that's turnover rates, whether that's disengagement in the workforce, the list can go on and on and on. But it's being able to identify, I'm going to implement a workplace mentoring program primarily to deal with this particular issue.
The one that sort of struck me out of, like, I think I've got about a list of 10, 12 different measures that we sort of talked about. The one that sort of struck me was the testimonial. And I went, oh, that's kind of an interesting one, because the testimonial, depending on how long it is, it could be a little short story. And I remember that E.F. Forrester, I may not have the initials correct, but he shared at one point in time, he said, here's a story. The Queen died, the King died. Okay, it's a story. But he said, what would happen if you said the following? The Queen died, the King died of a broken heart. That second story is a very different feeling and enveloping way of looking at it. So when I heard the notion of testimonial, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we actually looked at and did a study, and this is me and my professorship world, we started looking at testimonials that are written from a mentee to a mentor, or a mentor to a mentee, and sort of see what kind of words are being used, and if numbers are being used in the testimonial, to explain, provide the measure of success of a mentoring arrangement. That's where, again, Doug knows me, is that's the kind of spin I'll go do, because it's just struck me as being kind of an interesting way to look at the measures of success. So I just add that's a key learning for me. And I'm also going to offer, I'm not going to go out there and start doing that as a research study. So don't worry about that, Doug. I won't be going out and doing that, okay?
Thank you. Great to see you both. Great conversation. Again, I'm going to quote you from I think from a while back. The question leads to the conversation and leads to the quality of your life. And I've been preaching that to a lot of people that I work with and I interact with. And so thank you.
Thanks for watching the video. We have an ask of you. Make sure you click the subscribe button and click the bell beside subscribe so you can receive more notifications of the videos that we're loading up. And like the video, and especially if you could comment your insights. We would enjoy learning from you. Take care.